This is a ghost town. An exodus left hundreds of rotting houses and the memory of a plague that nearly wiped out the people. The tragedy is being repeated in 145 other villages, all lying on the river Danube or its tributaries. This is the story of the victims, and of the intrigue and argument between scientists who investigated the disease while under communist rule.
Međutim, je otac rekao, kaže, čuvaj sinako, nemoj će kobaš.
A zašto?
Tamo je ta bubrežna bolest se pojavila u Kobašu, kaže, boluje mnogi od te bubrežne bolesti. Pa čuj, ako ti je za nas curu imaš u Kaniže cura, pa možeš naći u Kaniži. Ne moraš ići u Kobaš. Ja bi se sjetao da ne ideš u Kobaš. I da ne ideš tamo. Možeš naći neko da se zbiljam, zavoliš neko pa da uzmeš, a može biti bubrežna bolesna, pa da tu bude nam familija bolesna bubrega i potomstvo da ostane.
Za 25 godina moje službe ovde, jedno 300 duša je sahranjeno. Od tih 300 duša sigurno je više od 200 от те опаки болести.
Болестта се казват, защото бъбреците ни са намаляват колко един орех стават. И не можем да уринираме и дигаме висок кръчелин.
Doctors in the Balkans were quick to examine the kidneys of their patients. Many of the victims had huge cancers on the kidney tubes. But the biggest shock was that under the onslaught of this terrible disease, an adult's kidney could just shrivel away.
Ovo je najmanji bubreg iz naše kolekcije. Taj bubreg odgovara veličini djeteta od 1 godine, a težini od oko 20 grama. Ovo je bubreg normalne veličine, težine oko 150 grama.
Ja se u stvari sjećam ovoga čovjeka čiji je ovo bubreg. Ja sam ga posjećivao kod njegove kuće i pratio njega 12 godina u toku bolesti. Nevjerojatno je da je čovjek sa ovako malim bubrezima mogao toliko dugo živjeti.
Around 50,000 cases of this bizarre kind of kidney disease are scattered across the world. But it was in a small area of Eastern Europe, in the Balkans, that hotspots were identified by scientists after the war, giving it the name Balkan endemic nephropathy. These hotspots are found in Bulgaria, Romania, and Yugoslavia. Any team of scientists able to find the cause would be assured of an international reputation, and the people needed a quick push against the disease. But the Balkans, though they look peaceful, are riven with internal strife, and efforts were to be fragmented and often misdirected. In the late 50s, key scientists in 3 regions started their quests into the disease separately. 2 were in Yugoslavia, a Croat to the west, a Serb in the center, and 1 was in Bulgaria in the east. By the end of the 50s, the Bulgarian scientist had virtually disappeared from view behind the Iron Curtain. The Yugoslavs had been split by a long and bloody history, which had culminated in the 40s when some 600,000 Serbs were massacred by Croatian fascists. The hatred between the Serbs and the Croats remains to this day. Isolated, therefore, from the other centers was a Croatian doctor, Stefan Čiović.
Prvi put sam o tome čuo ljeta 1957. godine kad sam kao student 4. godine studija medicine prisustvovao u ljetnoj praksi u Brodskoj bolnici. I tada na jutarnjoj viziti je šef odjela dolazeći kod jedne žene rekla po prilici ovo. Evo, ovo je primjer bubrežne bolesti To je bila jedna mlađa žena, ekstremno anemična, kakvih ima još u Brodskoj Posavini. Tko želi sutra ići, to je bila subota, tko želi sutra ići sa mnom da napravimo pregled više osoba u tome selu.
From then on, Dr. Chiovic was to dedicate his life to search for the cause of the strange deaths. Any detective must start by collecting the evidence. So Dr. Chiovic went to the center of the plague area to talk to the villagers about their experiences.
Pa to, koliko sam čuo, ja sam bio 6 godina kad je majka umrla i 2 sestre su umrle. Jedna od 32 godina, jedna je od nešto oko 45, 50, tako. Isto taka slična bolest.
Peter Kovalchuk's family think the disease is caused by an infection, but there have been as many theories as there are victims.
A ja ne znam šta bi moglo biti. Kaže voda.
Ja mislim da je ratno stanje najviše tome doprinijelo. Oba dva rata.
Je to jedna nasledna bolest?
Храна слаба удари во бобрици.
Нефрита са фана от глада. Както и сега ще гладуваме. Ни гласат.
Čovjek ima spoznaju da je to sve tako vrlo jednostavno i da je zapravo odgovor na to osnovno pitanje što uzrokuje bolest negdje tu, pokraj nas, samo što ga mi ovaj čas ne možemo vidjeti.
Dr. Chiovic's first response to the victims was a practical one. He set up a clinic. Nowadays, 39 sufferers are bussed into the town of Slavonski Brod 3 times a week. Most of them are over 40 and can expect to be kept alive for another 10 years, unlike many of their friends and relations. But treatment here is expensive, and 80 more patients have been left behind in the village to die in a matter of months. In the clinic, the patient's blood is passed through an artificial kidney, a machine which cleans it mechanically before returning it in tubes. But dialysis is no cure. If he was really to help his patients, Dr. Chiovic knew that he had to find the cause of this crippling disease. So back in the 60s, he set about trying to find out if it was an infection.
Dalje se nastavilo ispitivati također razni biološki materijali od bolesnih i osoba iz okolice na salmonele, krv, stolica, mokraća, šigele, streptokoke i tu nije bilo zadovoljavajućih pozitivnih rezultata. U posljednjim godinama, dakle u zadnjih 5-6 godina, ispitivali smo moguću vezu ove bolesti sa virusima iz grupe hemoraških groznica, kao i hantan viruse, i poslano je više uzoraka krvi u pojedine centre evropske, međutim, rezultati su bili negativni.
Meanwhile, the Serbs were onto something new. Their chief scientist is Zoran Radovanovic.
Almost 35 years ago, when the disease was originally described, one of its peculiar features was that it took place topographically. It was distributed only along the rivers. And all affected individuals used to grind their corn in water mills.
The Serbian scientists quickly discovered a likely culprit. The millers had been mending their stones with a lead-based grouting, and they knew from Australian work that lead causes kidney failure. They examined the local mills and found 5 times the normal level of the metal in the flour. Local people had high levels of lead in their hair and blood. and the metal was found in their kidneys after they died. In 1964, the government ordered the closure of all the local water mills. "36 mills ground to a halt and were eventually pulled down. One mill alone is still standing, a museum piece. But all of this destruction may have been pointless.
Soon afterwards, it came out that in some of the affected areas, there was no lead in blood samples, in hair samples. People who never used water mills were affected as well, and then this hypothesis was abandoned.
In spite of this disappointment, Zoran Radovanovic was still convinced that the disease was caused by a poison, and the local water had been badly polluted. It had happened as the result of a huge battle fought in the First World War. The Allies, fighting with Serbia, defeated the combined troops of Croatia, Austria, and Germany. Thousands of soldiers died on the battlefield. Their remains were left behind to rot.
Moj otac pričao da su tu oni skupljali leševe, skupljali su oružje, ali municiju nisu mogli su pokupiti, da je tu ostala grna količina metaka, bombi, svega od tog ratnog materijala koje se taložilo i smatrali smo, ja smatram barem, da je to se slivalo niz ovaj deo reke otoka Bukovca i slivalo se baš prvom u Crnu Baru. Da je došlo do verovatno nekih, razumeš, trovanja vode ili nečega. To ja ovako iz mog zdravog razuma sumnjam da je došlo verovatno do toga.
In Black Swamp Village, Zoran Radovanovic tested the Ivanovic family well for pollution. During the 60s, he tested many of the local wells. Was there anything that shouldn't be there, or that was found in too large a quantity, or too small? Was this lack or excess found only in the wells of households with a disease? The water turned out to be very similar to water in the taps of Surrey homes.
More than 20 years ago, I was much more enthusiastic, and now I share pessimism of some of my colleagues because we made so much efforts in order to try to explain the causation of the disease, and we repeatedly failed. It seems that we need a fresh blood or a basically different approach to the problem.
Had drawn a blank on infection and on poisons. It was from the third team, the Bulgarians, that the next push was to come, and the first vital clue was to emerge. Their leader, a tough-minded communist of the old school, is Professor Tsvetan Dimitrov from Sofia's prestigious medical academy.
И така, да се каже, се венчах с проблема балканска ендемична нефропатия и започнах първите проучвания още в болницата във Враца, където работих като млад лекар. Тогава извърших първите генеалогични проучвания в България, в ендемичните села, и се повтаряше една изключителна закономерност на строго фамилно предаване на заболяването.
Tsvetan Dimitrov had found one family where 32 members had died of the disease, and he had an idea that, at the time, was unfashionable. He became convinced that the disease is inherited and passes from parent to child like brown eyes or curly hair. What he lacked was proof. For Dimitrov, the unhappy village of Karash was to provide a golden opportunity. The town died in 1961 when the population had been tested and at least a quarter of them had been found to have the disease. The government thought the village itself was to blame, and with the grandiose Eastern Bloc planning of the time, they moved the inhabitants to Sofia. Out of the original 3,400 Karashis, only 5 families remained.
Тук и с него това. И вика, ако не може да го изселяме селото, ще го запалиме. И взема да лъжат хората, виж, да ги събират тук, да се подписат кой къде сака из цяла България. И заключия тук къщите. И след това дойде от Министерството на народно здраве, Държавен медицински резерв, почна да кара багаж тук и почна да събарат къщите. Остана само 5 къщи. 5 семейства.
Of these 5 people, 4 are healthy. Nitsa Tomchova, Christo Mitov, Ivan Zladev and Vasil Mikhov. And they all come from healthy families. Only Georgy Sarov, the mayor, has the disease, and many of his family are also sufferers. So far in line with the theory that the illness is inherited. But the crucial evidence comes from those who moved. If they stopped being ill, as the government thought they would, the disease must be caused either by a poison or a local infection. But if new cases continued to appear even after the people got to Sofia, the disease, Professor Dimitrov reasoned, must be inherited.
Никаква разлика в клиничната картина на заболяването не се установи след изселването на тези хора от тяхното първоначално местожителство. Заболяват членове на строго определени фамилии. В същите селища има и напълно здрави фамилии, които нямат случаи на заболяване от ендемична нефропатия. Излезлите членове от фамилиите и отишли по повод брак или пък други причини на емиграция, продължават да заболяват от заболяването на своите родители, на своето семейство в новите си местожителства.
So 20 years after the discovery of the first case, there were at least some positive results in print. And in 1972, Professor Dimitrov published more evidence to back his theory that the disease is inherited. These new experiments were designed to find out how early in life the disease can be spotted and whether children from affected families, though superficially healthy, carry the disease.
Това беше апостолска работа. Аз ходех в селата, след като имах пред себе си родословията, фамилните дървета на тези хора. Бях ги изградил и след това обикалях селищата и се срещах с всеки член от тези фамилии, който беше клинично здрав. Тези клинично здрави индивиди ги вземах в болнична обстановка и там правех подробни клинични, лабораторни и функционални изследвания и след това правех реновазографски изследвания на тези хора.
These unusual experiments, which would not have been done in the West, included taking small slices of kidney for examination from the children of affected families who were themselves healthy. These biopsies provided key data. They showed that some of the healthy-looking children were, in fact, affected. The cells that separate urine from blood were disintegrating. The evidence that the disease is passed from parent to child by a faulty gene seemed unassailable.
Тези данни доказаха, че заболяването започва от детска възраст, протича много дълго латентно и се изявява клинически след някъде до към 5-то десетилетие, където е пикът, върхът на най-голямата честота на заболяването. И тези данни дават основание да приемем доминантен тип на унаследяване, т.е. да се касае при ендемичната нефропатия за автозомно доминантно заболяване. Това е несъмнено доказано.
But unknown to Professor Dimitrov, back in Croatia, Dr. Čirvić had evidence that was to blow the theory to pieces.
U Brodsku Posavinu doselila jedna etnička skupina ljudi iz Ukrajine prije jedno 80-90 godina koji nisu prethodno imali nikakvog kontakta sa ovom populacijom.
In 1905, the Ukrainians were offered free land in Croatia by the Austro-Hungarian emperor, and many of them had settled there. In the village of Kanica, there are to this day 2 populations which haven't intermarried. There was no Balkan disease in the Ukraine, so if it is inherited, the immigrants should be safe. One of them is Peter Kovalchuk.
Neki su glumili, kaže, došli i ovi iz Ukrajine i donili bubrežnu bolest. A sada nema, svi umiru, i starosjedioci, i doseljenici, i kako ja mogu reći, svi.
Na osnovu prirodnog eksperimenta koji traje već punih 80 do 90 godina na ovome području, mi ne možemo prihvatiti da je to hereditarna bolest.
Доктор Чаович цитира заболяване сред украинци, които са имигрирали в района на Славянски Брод през 1905 година. У нас подобни случаи не се наблюдават.
In spite of this denial, Professor Dimitrov could not disprove the evidence provided by the Ukrainians. And there was an important alternative explanation for his own findings. The Karashis could have been infected or poisoned in Karash, but not developed the symptoms until after they moved. This was to make the quest for the cause of Balkan nephropathy even harder. Whatever caused the disease could have happened half a lifetime before the average patient appeared in the surgery. To make matters worse, the epidemic was spreading. By the late 70s, there was still one glimmer of hope. Transplants had just got going. In the Balkans, donors are almost always parents.
Nijedna majka to ne bi mogla, zato što svatko želi svojem djetetu sve najbolje. I ja sam mislila, on kad dobije bubreg neće više ići na dijalizu i bit će lakše i njemu i meni. Kad je operacija bila gotova, on ponašao se pravo kao zdrav. 4,5 godine. I to ljeto mu je bilo malo slabije. Osjećao se kao jako umoran. I otišli smo u Zagreb, to je ova bolnica Jordanovac, jel te? I eto, nažalost, tamo nije bio dugo, drugi dan umre. I tako je bilo sve gotovo.
Even kidney transplants have a low chance of success here, perhaps because of poor technology, perhaps because the killer was affecting the new kidneys too. There seemed to be no hope of an early breakthrough. Unexpectedly, relief came from the other side of Europe, from Denmark. In this massive slaughterhouse, 6,600 pigs are processed every day. In 1972, this 18 billion kroner industry was in trouble. Routine inspections by the slaughterhouse vets showed that the pigs had bloated kidneys and that the functional tissue was wasting away.
The veterinarians at the slaughterhouse had known that for quite some years, that in some animals, the kidneys were enlarged, they were hardened, they were mottled on the surface, but there were no other things wrong with these animals. So they were not condemned for human consumption.
The animals with these abnormal kidneys didn't put on weight so quickly. They were costing the farmers money. The mystery was that the pigs with the disease seemed to live the same way as their healthy relatives. Their living quarters were the same, the temperature was the same, the water was too. The only clue the investigators had was that the disease was much worse after wet summers. They quickly realized that the only thing that changed each summer was the food. In wet years, their grain went slightly moldy.
It was in 1972. We got hold of 2 tons of contaminated barley from a farmer who had the misfortune to have his barley contaminated. And we started feeding experiments with the barley and realized that we could reproduce the disease that is found on the slaughterhouse.
All growing molds manufacture chemicals. Some we use as antibiotics, some are poisons. And one recently discovered poison was ochratoxin. Ochratoxin is produced by dozens of ubiquitous fungi, molds like penicillium, which grow everywhere. And in 1972, when the Danes started their analysis, ochratoxin had just been found to damage rat kidneys in America. Professor Elling had his starting point.
It was not until the beginning of the 70s, when it had been discovered that ochratoxin was a renal toxin, that we started looking for ochratoxin in the barley. And it was at that time we realized that ochratoxin probably was the culprit, or at least we could demonstrate that it was able to produce a disease, but we could not be sure whether there would be other toxins in the barley.
To find out, the Danes examined kidney sections taken from pigs fed a diet of ochratoxin. The ochratoxin had been labeled with a fluorescent dye. The kidney contains rings of vital cells which reabsorb nutrients from urine before it is excreted. The fluorescing ochratoxin ended up in those very cells and destroyed them. The Danes had discovered the cause of the kidney disease in pigs. Back in Croatia, Dr. Čirvić heard the news when one of Professor Elling's colleagues, Pala Krog, got in touch.
Već kod prvog susreta Pale Krog je zainteresirao mene za ochratoxinsku nefropatiju, jer je prezentirao sve ono što je on znao, što se dogodilo do tada u Danskoj i u drugim nekim zemljama.
The Balkan patients had lost the same essential kidney cells as the pigs. Could these people have been eating ochratoxin too? Stefan Čirvić went to look for mold. The conditions are ideal in the damp villages of the areas with the disease. Food is stored in cellars or attics, and they are both warm and damp, just right for a profusion of fungi. But do the fungi produce ochratoxin? Inside the stores, the temperature and humidity were found to be right for the microscopic fungi to produce their poisons. But Dr. Čirvić needed the help of an expert toxicologist to measure the toxin in people, and he found a fellow Croat to do the job.
We have found, some 10 years ago, we have found ochratoxin A in human blood, and I think this was one of the first, not one, it was the first result, and the proof that the humans are exposed to this nephrotoxin.
But as the Croats went on to compare villages inside the endemic region where the disease is prevalent with those similar villages where the disease is not present, a problem emerged.
One of the weak points of the theory is that ochratoxin was found also outside of the endemic region.
The evidence that ochratoxin causes kidney disease in humans seemed to be falling at the first hurdle. The distribution of the poison in food and people did not match the distribution of the disease. The incidence of the rare Balkan cancers also had to be explained, and the Danish pig research hadn't produced any evidence that ochratoxin causes cancer. While the Croatian theory faltered, their chief rivals in Bulgaria announced an astounding development. Back in Sofia, Professor Dimitrov had been applying the latest techniques in genetics and announced that he had actually found a gene for the Balkan disease.
От 1983 година започнахме задълбочени изследвания със съвременния метод, високорезолютивен метод на ЮНИС, чрез който успяхме да достигнем до заключението за наличието на хромозомен маркер при балканска ендемична нефропатия в трети чифт хромозоми. Това ние считаме, че е сериозна лезия в зоната на трико 25 лента в дългото рамо на единия хомолог на трета хромозома, който намираме в 100% от всички болни с ендемична нефропатия и в 50% в тяхното поколение, които са клинично здрави.
This is the gene fault on chromosome 3 that Professor Dimitrov claimed produces the kidney disease. Professor Dimitrov had used techniques of genetic analysis developed by another Bulgarian scientist, Professor Manolov. He had discovered a gene for the cancer Burkitt's lymphoma to international acclaim. But Dimitrov looked to scientists in Moscow for confirmation of his results.
Тези факти бяхме принудени да консултираме с академик Бучков, с академик Сахаров, с професор Колешов от Москва, които потвърдиха нашите данни и даже нескромно звучи, но казаха, това е сензационно откритие.
For the victims and their families throughout the Balkans, these results were the confirmation of their worst fears. The discovery seemed to prove, beyond reasonable doubt, that the disease is permanently programmed into the family genes, just as the Serbian Father Serbar had originally suggested.
Pomiluj nas, Bože, po velici milosti Tvoje, molim Ti se usliši, pomiluj. Gospodi, pomiluj, Gospodi, pomiluj, Gospodi, pomiluj.
Milic Ivanovic's belief that the illness is caused by water pollution had come to nothing, as had the notion that it's transmitted by bacteria. And so had the theory that the food was poisoned with ochratoxin. But as the Ivanovics conducted their annual family blessing, something happened in Bulgaria that was to unearth a whole new set of facts. On the 29th of November 1990, the communist government was overthrown. In Bulgaria, like the rest of Eastern Europe, the demise of communism heralded the dawn of free speech. At last, dissidents could speak out, and nowhere was this more true than in the scientific community. They first spoke about science in general.
Науката беше място, където много силни хора в политически аспект можеха да вкарат свои близки, деца, роднини. Системата за назначаване беше такава, че привилегия имаха предимно хора, свързани политически с режим. По този начин в науката у нас, а и другаде, нахлуха масово хора, които бяха неподходящи за развитие. Тия хора трябваше да правят някаква наука. Каква наука да правят? Първо, те нямаха тия възможности, а да не говорим, че страната имаше също ограничени възможности. Но което беше по-лошо, тия хора бързо заемаха ръководни позиции и дори потискаха малкото случаи, които било с връзки, било без връзки, обикновено почти всеки в науката у нас е влизал с връзки, можеха да допринесат нещо.
Under the communists, many people in Bulgaria had been appointed and promoted to jobs through their connections rather than ability. And many semi-political crimes had gone unpunished, like the burning down of Professor Manolov's laboratories by anonymous arsonists. Working in this atmosphere of suspicion, any experienced scientist would naturally question major discoveries coming out of the blue, especially in their own field. Before the revolution, Manolov had come across Dimitrov's results, and he felt he had to investigate them.
С моята жена Янка Манолова ние изследвахме много прецизно 16 случая с балканска ендемична нефропатия. В нито един от тях нямаше никаква промяна от типа описана от Димитров и неговите съавтори. Маркер 3, както те го наричат, не съществува.
Chromosomes can be unstable. Professor Dimitrov could have confused real gene faults with faults caused by the experimental procedure.
Когато започнахме тези проучвания и констатирахме този факт в началото, ние се обърнахме към другите колеги, които провеждат проучвания с подобен метод на нашия. Тогава те беха много възхитени от нашите резултати и предложиха съвместно да разработим въпроса. Колаборация. Обаче, тъй като ние бяхме вече приключили нашите изследвания, такава колаборация не беше логична и не я направихме. След което вече те се обявиха като агресивни врагове на нашите резултати.
Според мен, публикуването на такива резултати от този тип автори е един от примерите на корупция в нашата наука. Защото аз не мога да си представя, че тия хора не са наясно, че те в действителност нямат резултати.
This issue concerned more than just the Bulgarians, and Professor Manolov wasn't the only one who couldn't find the marker.
We tried to find some disorders on chromosome 3, like Professor Dimitrov did, but on a limited number of persons, and we didn't find it.
The problems in repeating Professor Dimitrov's recent work have set off a flood of criticism. Especially criticized are his early experiments on perfectly healthy children.
Well, of course, it's a moral question. If these biopsies were taken just because of science and research, they are for sure not morally acceptable. But if those biopsies are taken during some operations on kidneys unrelated to research and because of some other disease, then I could accept it. But just to perform a biopsies to see how the kidneys look like in a 10-year-old child or, well, in a completely healthy person is, I would say, somehow even a crime.
Това е изключително сложен въпрос и аз заради това в началото не получавах съгласие от нашето министерство да направя биопсиите от децата. Но от научна гледна точка това е изключително важен факт, за да можем да дешифрираме характера на етиологията на заболяването.
Ethical or not, by the end of 1990, the genetic theory which Professor Dimitrov tried so hard to prove was no longer taken seriously by most scientists. The cause of ochratoxin, however, was not lost. 10 years ago, the dissident Professor Manolov started his work in the villages around Karash. The events of last year have released a flood of new information to other scientists in the Balkans about what he found. Manolov's group had discovered the poison in both sick and healthy Bulgarian villages, just like in Croatia. But they did more detailed studies. These revealed that although food and blood were contaminated in the healthy regions, the poison was found in much smaller quantities than in diseased areas. There was to be a further breakthrough. Professor Manolov's assistant, Dr. Dora Petkova-Bocharova, had been collecting blood samples in the area for years when she asked Manolov to look at them more closely. Professor Manolov found that the chromosomes are damaged. These genes are in blood cells, not in egg or sperm cells, so they would not be inherited, but damaged genes can trigger cancer. Could the Bulgarians have finally discovered the connection between ochratoxin and those rare tumors? Back in the lab, Petkova-Bocharova extracted ochratoxin from contaminated beans, treated healthy blood cells with them, and produced exactly the same genetic changes. News about potential carcinogens travels fast. The Americans instituted a thorough testing of ochratoxin in rats. In the 2-year studies, the incidences of renal cancers are the highest seen in any of the studies to date. Ochratoxin is a potent carcinogen. Absolute proof that ochratoxin causes the Balkan disease. Until long-term studies are completed showing the precise links between a lifetime's consumption of ochratoxin and the disease, other theories will continue to be debated. But Dr. Cijevich has not waited for absolute proof. He has acted.
Tako smo se izborili da se na čitavom ovom području izgradi vodovod, da se ove ceste asfaltiraju. Iskopani su duboki kanali, više nema direktnih poplava i bolje uskladištuju svoju hranu.
To his great joy, these measures are having an effect.
Prema tome, mogli bi reći da endemska nefropatija pokazuje određenu stagnaciju, odnosno da je nešto sada manji broj bolesnika nego što je bio ranije.
The West is also trying to stop ochratoxin contaminating food. Though even in Denmark there was some initial resistance to change. As soon as the Danes accepted that ochratoxin was a poison, they passed a law to stop affected pigs reaching the market. 20 vets spend their days on this production line, and each kidney is examined. Up to 25 carcasses a week are condemned. In spite of Dr. Cijevik's work, peasants in the Balkans are still at risk from their food. A vet from the nearest city has come out to collect these kidneys for the Croatian research team, but it would take a small army to inspect all the local pigs. And while living conditions in Yugoslavia are unlikely to improve further until the current round of civil disputes is resolved, in Bulgaria, things are actually getting worse. The economy has collapsed following the Soviet economic withdrawal. The number of diseased people is increasing, and the number of affected villages has gone up 3-fold since 1957. In a region where the people have so much in common, the Balkan disease remains a testimony to the muddle and delay in science that can be caused by politics and history.
In science and in research, you can never have a limit and say exact date when you will solve a particular problem and how the results will look like. But probably a collaboration between scientists of these two countries would improve our knowledge concerning this disease and would bring us much closer. And I hope this will happen in the future.
The struggle now is to keep those fledgling lines of communication open, in the hope that the rise of democracy in the area will mean that sufferers of the Balkan disease will never again be victims of the inability of scientists to communicate.